Hey, Great Lakes Church. My name is Jeremiah, and I am the pastor of Westbridge Church here in beautiful northwest suburbs of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I'm honored to be able to share with you guys in your series. And Pastor Dave and Rindy are great friends to my wife, Cherry, and myself. In fact, Dave and I have been friends for 25 years. And so that's pretty wild to think about. And then when all of this started a couple of months ago and we realized we got to go to online-only services for a season, Pastor Dave and I both sort of made this commitment. We are not going to shave until we can go back into the building and meet like regular. So I'm glad to see that that's going really well for him as well. And I love being here with you guys. I've spoken at your church several times before, although it's been a couple of years. And I'm excited to be a part of this series, Pressure Cooker. During this series, we're looking at how the pressure of this season can affect us in so many different ways. From parenting stress to stress in our marriage, to relational stress, to financial stress. I mean, this season has the potential to put a lot of pressure on our lives. And so we're looking at what that pressure does and how to deal with it in practical ways. And today I want to talk to you about loneliness. I think the words to a recent song by the band One Republic really resonate with a lot of us, particularly during this season. The lyrics go like this: "These days my waves get lost in the oceans. 7 billion swimmers, man, I'm going through the motions. Sent up a flare, I need love and devotion. Traded for some faces that I never know. Notion, maybe I should try to find the old me. Take me to the places and the people that know me. Trying to disconnect, thinking maybe you could show me. If there's so many people here, then why am I so lonely?" And the truth is, we all deal with loneliness from time to time. That's just the reality. You're either dealing with loneliness right now, or you just did, or you're on your way to a season of loneliness. Isn't that encouraging? Aren't you glad you tuned in today, right? And the Gallup organization actually found that 2 out of every 5 Americans at any given time are experiencing deep loneliness in their lives. And in fact, that ratio is even higher for teenagers and for the elderly. We all face loneliness. Loneliness is an equal opportunity offender. It doesn't matter who you are. We've all seen the VH1 Behind the Music, right? And it just doesn't matter who you are. We all deal with loneliness. Can rich people be lonely? Some of you are like, hey, I'd love to give it a shot, right? But a couple of years ago, I took my son Leighton to Mine Fair. This is absolutely nuts. This is a convention for Minecraft. And the line was out the door. I mean, we bought tickets in advance, and it still took us like 90 minutes just to get into the convention center. It's crazy. And the guy who invented Minecraft goes by the name Notch. And Notch actually sold Minecraft to Microsoft for $2.5 billion. And here was one of his tweets several months after he sold Minecraft to Microsoft. He said this: "Hanging out in Ibiza with a bunch of friends and partying with famous people. Able to do whatever I want, and I've never felt more isolated." So we know rich people can be lonely. Can successful people be lonely? Jim Carrey said this: "I think everybody should get rich and famous and get everything they've ever dreamed of so that they can see it's not the answer." Can intelligent people be lonely? Albert Einstein said this: "It's strange to be known so universally and yet be so lonely." What about famous people? Can famous people be lonely? Mother Teresa struggled with deep loneliness. After winning the Nobel Peace Prize, she actually wrote this to a friend: "Jesus has a very special love for you, but as for me, the silence and the emptiness is so great that I look and I do not see. I listen and I do not hear. The tongue moves in prayer but does not speak. I want you to pray for me." Intelligent people, famous people, rich people. Can beautiful people be lonely? And I'm here to tell you, yes, we can. So, see, it doesn't matter who you are. We all deal with loneliness from time to time. And even when you look at the Bible, some of the greatest characters of faith had major battles with loneliness. And so it's important for us to take a look at this topic because I believe that loneliness is one of the deepest forms of pain that a human can experience. In fact, a study at UCLA concluded that the feeling of being excluded or misunderstood actually provokes the same reaction in the brain as physical pain in the body. In other words, feeling alone or feeling isolated actually feels a lot like getting punched. Think about that. And here's what's critical to understand about loneliness. Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about feeling alone. Loneliness isn't about being alone, it's about feeling alone. It's not just about proximity, it's about an emotional state. It's not about the absence of people. It's about the absence of meaningful connection. It's about feeling misunderstood. It's about feeling isolated. It's the emotion that nobody else quite understands what I'm going through. See, you can be alone and not be lonely at all. Right? Just ask any mom who ever steals away just a couple of minutes by herself. You can ask her, are you feeling lonely right now? She'd be like, no, greatest 30 minutes of my life, right? Because she hasn't gone potty in 12 years without some little gremlin walking in on her, right? One of my favorite comedians on Twitter recently said, before I had kids, my bathroom was just my bathroom. Now, it's my Narnia. And I think we can resonate with that. You can be surrounded by people and feel completely alone. And one of the reasons loneliness is so painful is because we were created by God for deep connection with each other. It's in our DNA. It's a part of who God created us to be, and we cannot escape it. When you look at the creation story in Genesis, it says, and God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. Since God himself is community, and since we are created in the image of God, that means we are wired for community. We're wired for relationship. We are wired to be connected with one another. And the idea is that we are fully known and fully loved. But loneliness sets in when we're not fully known and when we're not fully loved. And you just look at all of the things that we have created to somehow connect in this thing called cyberspace, right? We've got, Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and MySpace and a gazillion other ones. The term friend used to mean somebody that you did life with. It was, we're together, we're doing life together, we're sharing life together, we're laughing, maybe we're confronting each other. Now a friend can be someone that you've never met in person that follows what you say on Facebook. And so what's happening in our sort of modern era that the term friendship, the term friend is really evolving. It's becoming something that it never was in the past. In fact, the average American has 328 Facebook friends. But the average American says that they only have 2 actual close friends, which is down from 6 2 decades ago. If one of my friends posts a picture on Instagram, I have the power to determine if it's like-worthy or not. Like, am I really going to double tap that and give them the heart, Is it worth that? Or do I just scroll right by another stupid cat picture that I'm sick of seeing, right? Hashtag get over your cat. I mean, if she posts another cat picture, I might just unfollow her because the way that friendship is done today, I'm in complete control of this relationship. Right? And I can manage it from a distance, and I'll show you the parts of me that I want you to see, and I'll tell you what I want to tell you, and if I don't want to respond, I don't have to. In fact, if you post too many duck-faced selfies or too many pictures of your, pyramid scheme, I'll just unfollow you because I'm in charge of this friendship. Actor Shia LaBeouf, in an interview a couple years ago, said this: we all want to be part of a community. And what we're doing to fulfill that is we're creating a family of ghosts on the internet. You're better off buying a motorcycle and joining the Hells Angels than joining Twitter and finding your community there. So maybe if people that type spam on the internet show up at your door when they're right in front of you and it's person to person and eyeball to eyeball, there can be a real soul connection. See, social media in our sort of era in human history, it gives us this illusion of companionship without any of the demands of real friendship. And what ends up happening is that we're living for likes, but we're longing for love. In spite of all of our social media connectors, We live in the loneliest recorded time in human history. So let me ask you this question. If you had to quantify, okay, and Pastor Dave, that means put into a number, all right? So if you had to quantify your level of connectedness, what would your vital stats be? A number of true friends that you know that you could call anytime, night or day. A number of people that you lied to this week when they asked you, hey, how are you doing? How about the number of drinks it takes to drown your loneliness? Or the number of bong hits, or the number of fantasies, or maybe the number of times that you'll swear under your breath, even during this talk, I'm not lonely. And while some of us might say, oh, I'm a 10. I'm so thankful for the community that I have and great friendships. I know that there's a lot of us who are engaging right now who would say, man, I'm a 1. I'm a 2. Like, I don't know that I'm really doing well, especially during this season. In fact, I feel kind of invisible. Does anybody else have any idea how difficult life is for me right now? And often when we face situations or emotions that cause us pain, we actually begin to deceive ourselves into thinking we are the only ones experiencing what we're going through. And one of the problems when it comes to loneliness is that well-meaning people use tons of cliches to try to make us feel better. Don't you just hate cliches? Like, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's like, what does that even mean? That doesn't make any sense, right? Or how about this one? It's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, right? Who wrote that? Right? That person has never had the let's just be friends talk, right? I mean, they have never been told, it's not you, it's me. The early bird gets the worm. There's no I in team. Give it 110%. All of these cliches, and the only thing worse than when Hallmark companies try to sort of peddle cliches and unhelpful tripe is when the church does it. Sometimes we're going through a painful situation and we feel completely isolated and we feel like there's no one to turn to and no one who will really understand what we're going through. And so we take a risk and we think, okay, you know what? Maybe I will try church because they should have the answer. And if I'm honest, I know there's been times in my life where I've shown up to church. And I'm sorry to say that usually the church answer is pretty cliche as well. Hey, cheer up, camper. God's with you. You're not going to be alone because God's with you. And I don't want to make light of that because I actually believe that God is with us. In fact, in Deuteronomy, it says, the Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you or forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. When Jesus was here on the earth in physical form, he said this to his disciples. He said, be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. And so I believe that. The Bible says if you're lonely, you can cling to this reality that God will never leave you and that you can have hope in a God that is ever present. And I got to tell you, I do sincerely believe that. And I can get there mentally. But if I'm honest, there's been some dark seasons in my life where in my heart and emotionally, I don't feel that at all. And so today, I'm not going to give you 3 happy hops to no more loneliness, okay? I don't have a Braveheart speech for you or any type of, inoculation against future loneliness. Instead, I would like to submit to you some thoughts on how to deal with loneliness and maybe some ideas that we can learn from someone in the scriptures who actually experienced loneliness on a pretty deep level. His name was David, and he writes a poem found in the Psalms. In fact, it's Psalm 142, and it's written about an incredibly lonely time in David's life. It's actually written from a cave, but to understand the context of the poem, we have to go back to the narrative in 1 Samuel and check out what is actually going on in this cave and in this story. So there's a guy named Saul. Saul is the king of Israel. In fact, he's the first king of the nation of Israel, but God has decided that when Saul dies, his successor is not going to come from his own family. Instead, he's chosen this guy, David, to be the next king after Saul. And Saul kind of finds out about it, and when he does, his heart becomes filled with jealousy. And so in order to keep tabs on David, he invites him into his court. And there, David wins the hearts of everyone in Saul's kingdom. And Saul just keeps getting more and more jealous. And finally, in a fit of rage, he grabs a spear and he hurls it at David and he tries to kill David. And David narrowly escapes with his life and finds himself on the run. And from this point on, Saul becomes really hell-bent on killing David. And so that's where we pick up the story. David is on the run. He's in fear for his life. And here's what we discover in 1 Samuel chapter 22. It says, David left Gath, and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. And all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around them, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. So here's David. He's hiding in this cave. He's trying to escape this psychopath who's trying to kill him. And he's experiencing the most lonely season of his life. No one could understand what he's going through in this moment. So he goes to this cave. He's in hiding. He's away from it all. And then somebody, hears about what's going on. And they put it out on Twitter. Somebody puts something out on meetup.com. And suddenly, attention, all those in distress and in debt and who are discontented and discouraged, come to the cave at Adullam. David's here. And so here's David. He's sitting in this cave during one of the lowest seasons of his life, and he's surrounded by this group of misfits who are coming out. And this, what happens in the midst of this is this incredibly beautiful poem. And it's a poem about what he's really feeling and how he deals with his loneliness in this dark season of life. And what you're not going to find in this is a whole lot of cliche. What you're going to find is just a whole lot of raw honesty. And folks, if you're in this season where you feel really lonely, this is really what you got to do. The first step is this. Number one, just be honest with God about your emotions. Be honest. God can handle it. Be honest with God about your emotions. There are times when God feels absent. There are times when God feels silent and people don't feel close. And when I personally feel like nobody has a clue what I'm going through. And often the starting point to moving through my season of loneliness is to cry out to God and tell him exactly how I feel. In fact, if you've ever read the Psalms, most of which were written by David, it's pretty obvious. He pretty much wears his heart on his sleeve. He doesn't really pull any punches. And while, a lot of times when we think of Psalms, we think of Psalms of praise. There are a lot of Psalms that are like Psalms of lament. Psalms of like, God, why have you totally hosed me? Right? Like, there are plenty of Psalms like that. And you'll notice David is being honest with God, and he begins to just pour out his complaints to God. Here's what he says. He says in Psalm 142, verses 1 and 2, I cry out to the Lord. I plead for the Lord's mercy. I pour out my complaints before him, and I tell him all my troubles. In fact, throughout the Psalms, we find David writing things like this. In Psalm 22, he says, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far away when I groan for help? Every day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. Every night I lift my voice, but I find no relief. This is one of these like clench your fists at the sky kind of, prayers, right? Another one, he writes this in Psalm 44, awake, O Lord, why do you sleep? Rouse yourself. Do not reject us forever. Why do you hide your face and forget our misery and oppression? Like, who talks to God like that, right? David's a wreck, and he's crying out from the darkest place of his life. He's saying, God, where are you? Like, wake up and smell the Starbucks. Like, I need you, and you seem silent. And that's because it's okay to cry out like that, because that's how you really feel. And if that's how it's in there, then you got to get it out. I love, there's a pastor named Terry Wardle who was a long time a lead pastor of a church, and then a seminary professor and president, and now he does a lot of counseling, particularly of groups of pastors. And he was telling the story recently on an interview that I heard with him where he said there was round tables of pastors, probably a couple of hundred pastors in the room. And he had someone telling their story and sort of sharing with the group. And as he was sharing some of his frustrations and his isolation and his loneliness, he let an F-bomb spill out of his mouth. And suddenly he caught himself and said, oh, I shouldn't have said that. And Terry in the interview says, hey, I just dropped an F-bomb right back at him. Said, hey, it's fine. Hey, there's no judgment here. And he said, for the next 20 minutes, I heard that pastor use that as a verb, an adjective, an adverb, a pronoun. He said, but that's the way it was in there. That was the emotions he was feeling, so he needed to get it out. And I can tell you, God is not put off or afraid of or shocked by the raw emotions that you feel. And we begin connecting to God when we start being really gut level honest about what's really going on in our life. When we can get to that point where we're like, God, this is where I'm at, and this is what I'm going through, and where are you? Because you just feel really far away right now. And I need to know that you're going to carry me through this season, but if I'm being honest, like, I don't feel you at all. And God's not surprised. He already knows. You are not going to shock God. And I think when we finally get to that point where we can be totally honest, shake our fist at the sky, kind of gut level honesty with God, I think God gets excited, like, yes, finally my son is being honest, my daughter is being honest. Now I can get in there and I can work. But it starts with being really honest with God. And then secondly, be honest with yourself about the source of your emotions. You see, it starts with being honest with God and where you're at emotionally and how you feel and taking that to God. But if you just stop there and you just wallow in that, then you'll never move forward out of that season of loneliness. But David starts to identify exactly what has brought him to this situation. In the next verse, he writes this: "Wherever I go, my enemies have set traps for me. I look for someone to come and help me, but no one gives me a passing thought. No one will help me. No one cares a bit what happens to me." And David begins to move beyond the emotions that he is feeling, and he starts to name exactly what's going on, exactly what's causing these emotions. He identifies specifically the source of his loneliness. And as humans, we often experience loneliness for a number of different reasons. And maybe you feel like nobody understands what it is you're going through. Maybe you're in the midst of a transition, a new job, a new city, a new position. It feels completely overwhelming. But maybe you feel rejected because of a breakup or because you're no longer friends with someone that you were great friends with before. Maybe it's a serious illness or an injury and you feel like nobody understands what I'm going through. Maybe it's moving schools. Maybe it's a divorce. Maybe it's empty nesting or retirement that's taken you off guard. Maybe it's just aging. There's even some good things in our lives that cause loneliness. And I think some of the biggest reasons for loneliness are ungrieved losses. We all experience losses along the way, but sometimes we don't grieve those things and we just move forward in life, and pretty soon those things start to stack up and kind of create a callousness on our hearts, and we start to think, does anybody know what I'm feeling? For some of us, it's childhood trauma that we never dealt with. For some of us, it's just perceptions and expectations that we think other people have of us that are false narratives. Whatever that is, David digs beneath the emotion and he tries to identify the source. Now, for me, personally, I have a lot of people who are in my life, but very few people who understands the emotion that goes into leading a church. That's why I love our group of network friends like Pastor Dave and some others who are a part of a group of pastors, because there's an understanding there. And now, please hear me. Okay, I'm not looking for an outpouring of emails or Facebook friend requests or anything like that. But my loneliest times as a human, as a person, are when I'm in a position where I need to make a decision for Westbridge Church, and there's nobody else that can make that decision. And that can feel very isolating. And so David is in this cave and he begins to complain. He starts to open up his heart and he begins to identify exactly what's going on. But then he starts to shift. He shifts from looking at what's going on externally to how it's actually affecting him internally. It's like, God, I kind of thought this whole thing was all about Saul trying to kill me. Like, that's a really big thing that's going on in my life. But I think it goes deeper than that. Like, if I'm being honest, here I am in my lowest point and I don't feel like I have any real friends. I feel totally alone. My enemies are surrounding me. And if I go a little deeper, I realize I'm sitting in this cave and I realize how vulnerable I am. I realize I'm kind of disappointed with where life has led me. I was supposed to be the king, and now I'm a hermit in a cave leading a band of misfits, you know? And as he kind of peels back the layers of emotions, and as we do that as well and seek to identify and understand what's really going on, it allows us to stop the cycle of emotions that keep us in that place. And that's where we move through that season to number 3. Lean into your relationship with God. Lean into that. See, David begins by being totally honest with his complaints and emotions, and then as he peels back the layers of emotions, he identifies what's actually going on beneath the surface, and he identifies the source of it, and he's honest with himself about that. And then he says this, verse 5, "Then I pray to you, O Lord. I say, you are my place of refuge. I thought I was hiding in this cave, but actually, this isn't my refuge. You're my refuge. You are all I really want in life. Hear my cry, for I am very low. Rescue me from my persecutors, for they are too strong for me. Bring me out of a prison so I can thank you, and the godly will crowd around me, for you are good to me." I'm taking refuge in a cave, but in reality, God, you're my place of refuge. You're really all I want in life. You have the power to restore my soul. He starts to remember that God's been faithful to him in the past. And folks, isn't this true? When you're in a season of isolation, loneliness, some type of difficulty or trial, when you're in a sort of a rough season in life, you start to think that you're the only one who's going through that. There's something very deceptive because when somebody else goes through a rough season, it's a prayer request. But when you go through a rough season, it like shakes your faith to its core. Because when we are in the midst of it, it can be so difficult to pull out of that and remember, God, you have been faithful to me in the past, and you will be faithful again. One of the most famous poems or psalms that David ever wrote is Psalm 23. While it's often speculated that he wrote this when he was a shepherd, he actually wrote it later in life as he's reflecting on his early years of being a shepherd. And some of these verses, he writes this, "Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and your staff protect and comfort me. You prepare a feast for me in the presence of my enemies." In these verses, David acknowledges that his circumstance never changed, but that God was with him in the midst of his darkness. He recognizes God is actually there with him. And then there's this line, and I remember as a kid thinking, this is such a weird thing to say. He says, "You prepare a feast or a table for me in the presence of my enemies." And I just remember always as a kid thinking, what is going on here? I pictured this battle scene where they all like stopped to have dinner together. It was just such a weird word picture, but what we know is that the table is a place of connection. The table it's a metaphor for relational connection and for friendship. David is acknowledging that in the midst of what feels like the darkest night of his soul, the darkest seasons, God hasn't left him. In fact, God is setting up a table to reassure him that, David, I long for friendship. I long for connection. I long for communion and community with you in the midst of the battle that rages around you. And so let me ask you this question. What is the storm raging around you right now? What are the enemies that you're battling? Do you feel alone? Because I want you to know God has set up a table, and he's longing for connection and for relationship with you. So what are you doing to lean into relationship with God? Are you spending some time praying, trying to connect with God? Are you spending some time listening to songs that remind you that God is with you and that remind you of God's promises? Are you reading the scriptures and meditating on those verses that remind you that God has been faithful to you in the past and he'll be faithful to you again? What are you doing to lean into that relationship with God? And finally, number 4, establish rituals to help you connect with others. Now, rituals for the sake of rituals are never helpful. Often when we think of rituals, we think of outdated sort of religious practices that don't make a difference in our life. But the word ritual is actually just a way of saying habit, right? It's something that is done intentionally and consistently to produce a desired outcome. Brushing your teeth is a ritual, right? Taking a shower, that's a ritual. Working out is a ritual. For me, eating Chipotle, ritual. Okay, it's just some good things in life. So there are certain things in our life that we do intentionally, consistently, because they actually lead us to a desired outcome. The author of Hebrews advises us to build a ritual of gathering together with others. Listen to what the author says. "Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope that we affirm. For God can be trusted to keep his promise. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." You say, but isn't that what we're doing during this season, that we're neglecting meeting together? Well, this wasn't written to churches gathering in large auditoriums. This is written to churches that met in homes. It's saying, hey, one of the ways that we spur each other on and encourage each other is that we get eyeball to eyeball, face to face. It's the best way to actually know someone so that we can encourage them to live out the way of Jesus. Throughout this chapter, the author is expressing how Jesus is our way to stay connected with God. And in these verses, the author shifts and says, we also have to stay connected with each other. Let's not stop meeting together. Let's keep encouraging each other. And maybe what that looks like during this season is in smaller groups or through Zoom or neighbor to neighbor. But let's not neglect the ritual of getting eyeball to eyeball with another person and encouraging them in the way of Jesus. That never happens by accident, by the way. You've got to cultivate this and make it a priority if you're going to stay connected. I played basketball in high school. You probably read about me. But I've always been a big fan of basketball. Steph Curry is one of the most fascinating players in the NBA. And one of the things that makes him so good is his ritual of a pregame warm-up. It's the very same warm-up every single time. He has established a ritual of completing certain practices so that when it's game time, he's ready to go. What rituals of connecting with others are a priority for you in your life? Without them, what tends to happen is that we tend to isolate ourselves. And when life happens, and when difficult seasons happen, and when the pressure is applied, loneliness sets in. But establishing rituals to help us connect, it doesn't mean that you'll never experience loneliness. It does mean that you'll have people to walk with you through those seasons when you do. You were created for community. I was created for community. We were not created for isolation. We need each other. So if you find yourself in a season of isolation and a season of loneliness as the pressure is on, number one, be honest with God about how you feel. Be honest with God about your emotions. Secondly, be honest with yourself about the source of those feelings. Third, lean into relationship with God. Do some things that remind you of God's faithfulness. And then number four, establish some rituals, some habits, some practices that help you connect with others. Not that you'll never experience loneliness, but that when you do, you'll have people there to walk through it with you. Let me pray for you as we close. God, thanks so much for my friends, Pastor Dave and Rindy. Thank you so much for Great Lakes Church and the partnership we've had with them. Thank you for each and every person who's participating and engaging with this today. And my prayer is that through this season, that God, you would help us see how near you are, how close you are, that we would recognize, our eyes would be opened to the fact that you truly are with us. And as we reflect on where we're at personally, we pray that you would give each of us, as we listen to this talk and engage with it, give us the wisdom to know how to put this into practice in our own lives, and then give us the courage to do it. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks so much. I loved being with you guys. Have a great week.